At my mother's 60th, she announced, "My daughter's so broke she begged me for rent, pathetic at 30. My uncle added, "Should have married rich." The guests' smirks vanished when my ex walked in and placed a sealed envelope on the table, then took a seat across from my mother, arms crossed. "And here's my favorite daughter," Jessica announced, holding up her phone to show the room. On the screen was a photo she'd taken without my knowledge. Me counting crumpled dollar bills at the kitchen counter last Tuesday, my face twisted with worry. The guests leaned forward to get a better look while she swiped to the next image. My overdue rent notice she'd photographed from my nightstand. My breath caught in my throat. She'd been in my room. She'd gone through my personal papers and turned my private struggles into tonight's entertainment. "Look at that concentration," she continued with mock affection, zooming in on my desperate expression. Catherine was so focused on making those $20 bills stretch. Wasn't that sweet of her to think math could solve her problems? Before we continue, if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, you're not alone. Please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who deserve to see their worth recognized. Now let's see what happens next. Nervous laughter rippled through the dining room. Aunt Linda covered her mouth with her napkin, trying to hide her smirk. Cousin Mike's wife whispered something behind her hand to the woman sitting next to her. I stood frozen by the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of dessert plates that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The photo showed everything. My wrinkled pajamas, the stack of bills spread across the counter, the calculator with its cracked screen that I'd borrowed from David's old room. Even the empty coffee mug with yesterday's lipstick stain was visible in the corner. "Mother," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "You went through my things." "Oh, honey, I was just looking for your laundry." Jessica's tone dripped with false innocence as she swiped to another photo. And imagine my surprise when I found this little treasure. The second image filled her phone screen. My rent notice with "Final Notice" stamped in red letters across the top. She held it high enough for everyone to see, angling it toward the guests like she was presenting evidence in court. $1,500 behind, she announced, reading from the notice. "Can you believe it? At 30 years old, my daughter is $1,500 behind on rent and had to come crawling to mommy for help." The room fell completely silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, studying my reaction, waiting to see if I'd crumble or fight back. The dessert plates in my hands began to shake. "Jessica, that's enough," Harold said quietly from his seat at the head of the table, but his voice lacked conviction. "Enough." Jessica turned toward her husband with theatrical surprise. "Harold, darling, we're celebrating honesty tonight. Catherine has been hiding her failures from everyone, pretending she's fine when she's obviously drowning." Uncle Matthew set down his wine glass with a heavy thud. "Catherine, sweetie, maybe it's time to face reality. All this independence nonsense. Look where it's gotten you. You should have found yourself a nice man with a steady income instead of chasing these ridiculous dreams." "Matthew's right," chimed in Mrs. Peterson from next door. "My daughter married her college boyfriend right after graduation. Now she's got a beautiful house and twin boys. Sometimes practical choices are the best choices." I wanted to disappear. To melt into the hardwood floor or slip out the back door while they continued dissecting my life. Instead, I carefully set the dessert tray on the nearest surface and clasped my hands together to stop their trembling. "Those photos were private," I said, finding my voice at last. Jessica laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. "Private? Honey, nothing's private when you're living under someone else's roof. Besides, we're family. Family doesn't keep secrets. Family doesn't humiliate each other either," I replied, the words coming out stronger than I felt. "Humiliate?" Jessica's eyebrows shot up in exaggerated shock. "Sweetheart, I'm trying to help you. Sometimes a person needs to hear the truth before they can change their situation." She swiped to a third photo, me sitting on my bed in yesterday's clothes, staring at my laptop screen with dark circles under my eyes. I remembered that moment. I'd been applying for jobs, filling out applications until my eyes burned. She'd captured me at my lowest point and turned it into a punchline. "Look at this face," she continued, showing the phone to the guests again. "This is what defeat looks like, everyone. This is what happens when you refuse to accept help and insist on doing everything the hard way." The front door opened with a soft click and footsteps crossed the entryway. Everyone turned toward the sound, grateful for any distraction from the spectacle Jessica had created. Robert appeared in the doorway, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the October wind. He wore the navy suit I'd helped him choose for job interviews 2 years ago, and his green eyes swept the room with quiet assessment before settling on Jessica's phone, still displaying my photo. "Sorry I'm late," he said calmly. Jessica's confident smile faltered. "Robert, what are you doing here?" "Catherine invited me." His voice was steady, matter-of-fact. He stepped into the room like he belonged there, like the harsh words Jessica had spoken about him in this very space were ancient history. I hadn't invited him. We'd barely spoken in months. From his jacket pocket, Robert pulled out a cream-colored envelope. Without ceremony or explanation, he walked to the dining table and placed it directly in front of Jessica's plate, right next to her birthday cake. Then he pulled out the empty chair across from my mother and sat down, his arms crossed, his expression calm but watchful. The envelope sat between them like an unspoken challenge. Jessica stared at it, her phone finally lowering to the table. The room held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Something inside my chest shifted, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. For the first time all evening, I wasn't the center of unwanted attention. I was watching my mother's face as she realized she no longer controlled the narrative. I walked to the front door, not to escape, but to step outside where I could breathe and prepare for whatever revelation that envelope contained. The cool October air filled my lungs as I stepped onto the front porch, leaving behind the tension and that mysterious envelope. My hands were still shaking from Jessica's photo display, but out here in the darkness I could finally think clearly. The porch swing creaked in the wind, the same sound that used to comfort me during high school heartbreaks. Now it just reminded me how little had changed since then. I was 30 years old, standing on my childhood porch, hiding from my own birthday party disaster. Through the dining room window I could see Robert still sitting across from Jessica, that envelope untouched between them. The party guests had resumed their conversations, but their voices seemed muted, cautious. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. I couldn't watch anymore. I slipped back inside through the kitchen door and climbed the stairs to my room, the same route I'd taken countless times as a teenager when family gatherings became too overwhelming. The second-floor hallway felt narrower than I remembered. The family photos lining the walls told their usual story. David's graduation ceremonies, his wedding, his various business ventures celebrated with champagne toasts. My pictures were there too, but they stopped abruptly at high school graduation. After that, it was as if I'd simply vanished from the family narrative. I pushed open my bedroom door and flicked on the light switch. The sight that greeted me never failed to sting. Nothing had changed since I was 17. The wallpaper still featured those ridiculous pastel vines I'd begged Jessica to let me paint over. The corner desk where I used to spread out college brochures and plan my escape to Europe sat exactly where it always had, now covered with my current reality: job applications, past due notices, and a calculator with a cracked screen. The layoff had happened 8 months ago. Downsizing, they called it. 23 people let go in a single afternoon, including me and my entire marketing team. The severance lasted 3 months. The unemployment benefits covered basic expenses for another 4. By month 7 I was digging through couch cushions for grocery money. Moving back home had felt temporary at first. Just until I got back on my feet, I told myself. Just until something better came along. But weeks turned into months and every job interview seemed to end the same way. Polite smiles, promises to call, then silence. The room felt smaller now that it housed adult-sized problems alongside teenage memories. My laptop shared space with the same pink lampshade I'd picked out for my 13th birthday. My professional blazers hung in the closet next to prom dresses I couldn't bring myself to donate. I walked to the window that overlooked the backyard and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The tire swing David and I used to fight over still hung from the old oak tree, though now it was weathered and forgotten. We'd spent entire summers out there, spinning until we were dizzy, convinced we were practicing for astronaut training. Those were the days before Jessica decided I needed realistic expectations. Before she started redirecting my dreams toward more practical paths. The corner desk drawer stuck when I tried to open it, swollen from years of humidity. Inside, buried beneath old school supplies and forgotten birthday cards, I found what I was looking for. A small piece of cream-colored paper, torn and creased from being handled too many times. It was a fragment of my acceptance letter to the University of Edinburgh. The header was still visible. Congratulations. We are pleased to inform you. The rest had been torn away, but I knew every word by heart. Full scholarship. International business program. A chance to start over somewhere Jessica's opinions couldn't reach me. I'd found this piece 3 years ago in Matthew's garage, crumpled up and used as scratch paper for his grocery list. Milk, bread, eggs, scrawled right over my dreams in blue ink. That's when I truly understood how little my ambitions meant to this family. The acceptance letter had arrived the same week Jessica announced David would be attending Northwestern's business school. His second attempt, after dropping out of his first program to find himself in Costa Rica for 6 months. The family celebrated his gap year adventure with a welcome home party. My academic achievement got torn up and thrown away. Different expectations for different children, Jessica had explained when I confronted her. David has natural business instincts. You're more of a supporting player type. Supporting player. Even now those words made my chest tighten. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a wild moment I thought it might be from Robert, some explanation for his surprise appearance downstairs. Instead, David's name flashed on the screen. Heard about the drama tonight. Maybe it's time to grow up and accept help when it's offered. I stared at the message, anger bubbling up in my throat. David texting from his downtown apartment. The one Jessica and Harold had co-signed for. David, who'd never worried about rent because family money always appeared when he needed it. David, who called his failures learning experiences, while mine were labeled as character flaws. I deleted the message without responding. The house had grown quiet below. Either the party was winding down or everyone was too fascinated by Robert's mysterious envelope to maintain normal conversation. I wondered what was in that envelope, why he'd chosen tonight to deliver it, why he'd looked at me with such intensity before sitting down. We hadn't spoken properly in months, just occasional text exchanges that always left me feeling hollow. But I remembered our last real conversation right here in this room, 3 weeks before the layoff happened. Still dreaming about London? He'd asked, sitting on the edge of my bed while I folded laundry. Not anymore, I'd lied because admitting the truth felt too dangerous. Those were kid dreams. Time to be realistic. He'd studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Shame. I always liked your unrealistic dreams better than most people's realistic ones. 2 days later he'd sent me a job posting with no explanation. Just a link and a wink emoji. I'd looked at it briefly, some international marketing position, then closed the browser tab. Dreams were luxury items I couldn't afford. Now standing in this room that held all my abandoned possibilities, I wondered if I'd been wrong to dismiss it so quickly. Maybe, just maybe, some dreams were worth fighting for even when everyone around you insisted they were impossible. Downstairs I heard the front door open and close. Guests leaving probably. The evening was ending, but something told me the real story was just beginning. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway pulled me away from the window. I watched the Petersons walk to their car, Mrs. Peterson's voice carrying through the night air as she gossiped with her husband about the evening's drama. More guests would follow soon, leaving Jessica to deal with whatever Robert had brought to her birthday party. I sat on the edge of my bed, still holding that torn piece of my acceptance letter, when my laptop chimed with an email notification. Probably another rejection, I thought. Or worse, another automated response thanking me for my interest while politely declining to move forward. But something made me look anyway. Maybe it was the way Robert had appeared tonight, confident and purposeful. Maybe it was the way he'd placed that envelope in front of Jessica with such certainty. Or maybe I was just tired of feeling powerless in my own life. I opened the laptop and stared at the screen. The email wasn't a rejection. It was from a company called Meridian Global, asking if I was still interested in the position Robert had sent me months ago. The international marketing role I'd dismissed as another impossible dream. My finger hovered over the mouse for several seconds before I clicked the link to read the full job description. London office. European client management. Salary range that made my eyes widen. Travel opportunities. Everything I'd convinced myself I didn't want anymore because wanting it hurt too much. The application deadline was tomorrow. I glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, this opportunity would disappear forever. along with any chance of proving to myself that I was more than Jessica's failed daughter living in a teenage bedroom. My hands trembled as I opened a new document and began updating my resume. I hadn't looked at it in over 2 years, not since the layoff had shattered my confidence along with my career. The words felt rusty, unfamiliar. How do you describe 8 months of unemployment without sounding desperate? How do you explain living with your parents at 30 without admitting defeat? I didn't. Instead, I wrote about resilience. About managing crisis communications during company restructuring. About leading teams through uncertainty. I turned my failures into learning experiences, my setbacks into stepping stones. It wasn't lying, it was reframing. Seeing my story through different eyes. By 2 a.m., I'd crafted a cover letter that felt honest and hopeful instead of desperate and apologetic. I uploaded my portfolio, triple-checked every word, and stared at the submit button until my eyes burned. The house had gone completely silent around me. The party was over, the guests departed, the drama temporarily paused. In this quiet moment, it was just me and a decision that could change everything. I hit submit and immediately felt sick. The response came faster than I expected. Just 3 days later. An email requesting a phone interview scheduled for Thursday afternoon. My hands shook as I replied, accepting the time slot and providing my phone number. Thursday morning, I told Jessica I was meeting friends for coffee downtown. She barely looked up from her crossword puzzle, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "Try not to spend money you don't have," she said without glancing up. Instead, I drove to the public library and sat in Robert's car in the parking lot, my phone connected to his mobile hotspot. He waited outside, pacing near the building entrance, giving me privacy while staying close enough to provide technical support if needed. The interview lasted 45 minutes. 3 people on the call: the hiring manager, a senior director, and someone from human resources. They asked about my experience with international clients, my adaptability to new cultures, my willingness to relocate. I answered honestly, surprised by how confident I sounded when talking about work I actually cared about. "We'll be in touch within 2 weeks, the hiring manager said before ending the call. I sat in Robert's car afterward, staring at my phone's blank screen, not sure whether to feel hopeful or terrified. He knocked on the window and slid into the driver's seat. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Maybe good." They seemed interested. I paused, then looked at him directly. "Why did you send me that job posting? We haven't talked in months." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "Because you're the smartest person I know, and watching your family convince you otherwise was breaking my heart." His words hit me harder than I expected. "Robert, I'm not trying to get back together, Catherine. That ship sailed when you chose their version of your story over your own. But I couldn't watch you disappear completely." We sat in comfortable silence while I processed what he'd said. Outside, families walked in and out of the library, children clutching picture books, teenagers lugging backpacks. Normal people living normal lives, pursuing normal dreams without having to justify their ambitions to anyone. The waiting period was torture. 2 weeks stretched into an eternity of checking email every few minutes, jumping every time my phone buzzed, analyzing every automated message for hidden meaning. Meanwhile, life at home continued as usual. Jessica bragged to anyone who would listen about David's acceptance into his 4th business program attempt. "He's really found his passion this time," she announced during Sunday dinner. The admissions committee was impressed by his diverse educational background. Diverse educational background. That's what they called his pattern of starting programs and quitting when things got challenging. I spent those 2 weeks taking on freelance writing projects. Small assignments that paid just enough to cover my contribution to household expenses. Jessica made sure I knew she noticed every time I cleaned the bathrooms or did extra chores, as if I were working off a debt instead of contributing to a family home. "At least Catherine's being useful," she told Aunt Linda during one of their weekly phone calls, her voice carrying through the thin walls. "It's good for her to learn the value of honest work." Honest work. As if my previous career had been somehow fraudulent. The offer email arrived on a Tuesday evening while I was scrubbing kitchen tiles, trying to work off my frustration with physical labor. My phone buzzed and I almost ignored it, assuming it was another freelance inquiry or promotional message. Instead, I found myself staring at the most beautiful email I'd ever received. The subject line read, "Job offer, International Marketing Manager position." Six-figure salary. Relocation assistance. Company apartment in London for the first 6 months. Start date, 3 weeks from acceptance. I read it 3 times before it felt real. Then I printed it out, my hands shaking as the pages emerged from Harold's old printer. I folded the papers carefully, slipped them into an envelope and carried that envelope upstairs to my childhood bedroom. I placed it under my pillow like a talisman, a secret piece of validation that proved I was more than this house's version of me. For the first time in months I fell asleep smiling. But I didn't tell them. Not yet. Something deep inside me wanted to savor this moment, to hold on to the power of knowing something they didn't. They had spent so long making me feel small, making me doubt my worth, making me believe their limitations were my reality. I wanted them to see the truth with their own eyes, not hear it filtered through my words that they'd learned to dismiss. I'd been carrying that envelope everywhere for 5 days now. Hidden in my purse during grocery trips, tucked under my pillow at night, folded carefully in my jacket pocket during job interviews I no longer needed. The paper had grown soft from handling, the edges slightly worn from my nervous fingers tracing its outline. Tonight felt different though. Tonight, as I descended the stairs and heard the familiar sound of Jessica orchestrating her performance, I knew the waiting was over. The dining room buzzed with post-dinner conversation. Someone had connected Harold's old camcorder to the television, and grainy footage of David's wedding played on the screen. Jessica narrated every scene like a proud director showcasing her masterpiece. "Look at him in his tuxedo," she gushed, pointing at the screen where David stood awkwardly at the altar. "So handsome. So successful. Marie was lucky to catch him when she did." Aunt Linda nodded approvingly. "Smart girl. Sometimes you have to strike while the iron is hot." Their words washed over me as I slipped back into the room, the envelope secure in my jacket pocket. I'd changed clothes upstairs, trading my casual dinner outfit for the navy blazer I'd worn to my Meridian Global interview. If tonight was going to be a performance, I wanted to look the part. Mrs. Peterson leaned toward her husband, her voice just loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's such a shame about Catherine. 30 years old and still figuring things out. Some people just mature later, I suppose." "Or not at all," Matthew added with a chuckle, raising his wine glass. "Some people get comfortable being comfortable, if you know what I mean." More knowing laughter rippled around the table. They were enjoying themselves, these people who'd watched me grow up and had somehow decided I was entertainment rather than family. Jessica switched to a video of David's college graduation, her voice rising with maternal pride. "Summa cum laude. The professors said they'd never seen such natural leadership potential." Natural leadership potential. The same David who'd called me crying last month because his latest business idea, a food truck selling gourmet grilled cheese, had failed after 2 weeks when he realized he didn't actually enjoy cooking or dealing with customers. I took my seat at the far end of the table, next to Cousin Mike's wife, who immediately shifted away from me like failure might be contagious. Robert caught my eye from across the room and raised his eyebrows slightly, a question I answered with the smallest nod. "Catherine's been so quiet tonight," Jessica observed, pausing the video mid-scene. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart? Not coming down with something, I hope?" The false concern in her voice made my stomach clench. She was setting up another moment, another opportunity to highlight my shortcomings in front of her audience. "I'm fine, Mother. Just thinking." "Dangerous territory for someone in your position," Matthew joked, and the table erupted in laughter again. That's when Robert stood up. Not dramatically, not with any grand gesture. He simply rose from his chair, placed his napkin on the table and cleared his throat. The laughter died gradually as people noticed his movement. Jessica's smile flickered uncertainly. "Jessica," Robert said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet. "I've been sitting here listening to everyone discuss Catherine's future, her failures, her supposed lack of direction." Jessica's face tightened. "Robert, I don't think. You told her she'd never leave this house," he continued, his tone remaining conversational but somehow commanding the room's complete attention. "You've spent years convincing her she's not capable of independence, not smart enough for bigger dreams, not worthy of the same opportunities you've given David." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Harold shifted in his seat. Aunt Linda stared into her wine glass. "Turns out," Robert said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "she's the only one in this family who got out on her own merit." He pulled out an envelope, not the one from my pocket, but an identical copy he must have made. With deliberate precision, he slid it across the table until it came to rest directly in front of Jessica's plate, right beside her half-eaten slice of birthday cake. Every eye in the room turned to me. I felt their stares like heat lamps, waiting for my reaction, my explanation, my inevitable breakdown under pressure. Instead I stood, slowly, calmly, without a word. Jessica's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. Her manicured fingers fumbled with the flap, tearing it slightly in her haste to understand what was happening. The paper rustled as she unfolded the job offer. Her eyes moved across the page, first quickly, then slower, then back to the top as if she couldn't process what she was reading. Meridian Global, she whispered, then louder, London office. International marketing manager. Her voice cracked on the salary figure. This can't be real. It's real, I said quietly. I start in 3 weeks. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't uncomfortable pause before laughter. This was the kind of quiet that follows explosions when people are still processing the damage. Matthew's wine glass slipped from his fingers. The sound of crystal shattering against the hardwood floor seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. Red wine spread across the polished surface like spilled blood, seeping into the cracks between boards that had witnessed decades of family dinners. I watched the wine spread and thought how appropriate it was. This stain that would mark this moment forever, this crack in their perfect narrative about who I was supposed to be. Mrs. Peterson gasped audibly. Cousin Mike's mouth hung open. Harold stared at the job offer over Jessica's shoulder, his face pale with shock. Catherine, Jessica's voice came out strangled. You couldn't have, without telling us? I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. Not as the daughter seeking approval, not as the failure accepting judgment, but as an equal who had just proven everything they believed about me wrong. I fly out Monday, I said, my voice steady and clear. Then I turned toward the door, my heels clicking against the hardwood with the same confident rhythm I'd practiced in my bedroom mirror. No tears. No explanations. No apologies for succeeding when they'd expected me to fail. Behind me I heard Harold's voice, weak and confused. Catherine, wait. We need to talk about this. But I was already at the front door, my hand on the brass knob I'd turned thousands of times before. This time, though, I wasn't running away from their disappointment. I was walking toward my freedom. The front door closed behind me with a soft click that seemed to echo through my entire body. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the cool night air, listening to the muffled voices inside continuing their stunned conversations. Through the window, I could see Jessica still holding my job offer, her face pale in the lamplight. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Harold. Catherine, come back inside. We need to discuss this properly. I deleted it without responding and walked to my car. The drive to my apartment, my old apartment, the one I'd given up 8 months ago, felt surreal. I'd sublet it to a graduate student when I moved back home, and she'd been understanding about me, occasionally stopping by to collect mail or forgotten belongings. Tonight I sat in the parking lot and called her. Emma? It's Catherine. I know it's late, but I was wondering, is the apartment available? Starting Monday. She was moving out anyway, heading to California for an internship. Perfect timing, she said. I was dreading having to clean it myself. 3 days. I had 3 days to transition from Jessica's dependent daughter to an independent woman flying to London. 3 days to pack a life, tie up loose ends, and prove to myself this wasn't just an elaborate dream. I slept in my car that night, parked outside a 24-hour diner, too wired to go back to the house and too proud to ask Robert for a couch. The vinyl seats left marks on my cheek, but I'd never slept better. Saturday morning brought the first phone call from David. I was in the laundromat, washing clothes I'd grabbed from my childhood dresser in a quick stealth mission while Jessica was at her yoga class. What the hell, Catherine? His voice was sharp with indignation. You embarrassed Mom in front of everyone. Mrs. Peterson is spreading this all over the neighborhood like gossip. I fed quarters into the washing machine, listening to his familiar pattern of making everything about him. Hello to you too, David. This isn't funny. You made the whole family look bad. Like we don't support each other. Support. I laughed, actually laughed. When have you ever supported anything I wanted to do? That's different. Your ideas were always impractical. This job thing, it's probably temporary anyway. You'll be back in 6 months and then what? You'll have burned bridges for nothing. I watched my clothes tumble in the soapy water, finding odd comfort in their predictable rotation. What thunder did I steal, David? What? You said I stole your thunder. What thunder? The failed food truck? The 3 business schools you've started and quit? The startup that lasted 2 weeks? The line went quiet for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. You've always been jealous. Even as kids, you couldn't stand that things came easier for me. Things didn't come easier for you. Money came easier. Forgiveness came easier. Second chances came easier. But things, you've never finished anything in your life. He hung up. Robert appeared at the laundromat an hour later, carrying coffee and looking like he'd barely slept. He didn't ask how I'd known to find him there. We'd done laundry together dozens of times when we were dating, always at this same rundown place because it was cheap and open late. Heard you might need help packing, he said, handing me a cup. How did you? Small town. Emma mentioned you called about the apartment. We worked in comfortable silence for the next 2 days. Robert never asked about our relationship, never pushed for explanations or declarations. He just folded my blazers with careful precision, packed my books in labeled boxes, and helped me sort through 3 decades of accumulated life. You did this, he said quietly on Sunday evening, wrapping my framed diplomas in newspaper. Not your family, not me, not luck. You. I stopped packing and looked at him. I never thanked you. For the job posting for tonight, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. You don't need to thank me for seeing what was always there. That night I made one last trip to the house. Jessica's car was in the driveway, but the lights were off except for the porch lamp. I used my key quietly, slipping upstairs to collect the last few items I'd forgotten. In the attic, buried behind Christmas decorations and David's old sports equipment, I found a box I'd forgotten existed. Inside were school newspapers I'd edited, creative writing awards I'd won, letters of recommendation from teachers who'd believed in my potential. And there, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve, was another piece of my Edinburgh acceptance letter. Not the fragment I'd found in Matthew's garage. This was a larger section, including the scholarship details and the dean's personal note about my exceptional promise. Jessica had kept it. All these years, while telling me I was impractical and unrealistic, she'd preserved evidence of my capabilities. I took the torn letter. Not as proof of their betrayal, but as reminder of my resilience. I'd survived having my dreams dismissed, my ambitions redirected, my confidence systematically dismantled. And I'd still found a way to rebuild myself. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling. Robert drove me to the airport, my 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag containing everything I owned that mattered. At the departure gate he hugged me briefly. Don't come back for them, he said. Come back for you if you want to. But not for them. As my plane taxied down the runway, I pressed my face to the small window and watched Chicago shrink below me. Somewhere down there, Jessica was probably telling someone how worried she was about my impulsive decision. David was likely explaining to his friends how family dynamics were complicated. Harold was perhaps wondering if he should have spoken up more over the years. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about the woman I was about to become. The one who'd applied for an impossible job in the middle of the night, who'd trusted herself enough to take a leap without a safety net, who'd walked away from a family narrative that had never fit her anyway. The plane lifted off, carrying me toward a life I'd chosen for myself. Below, the city lights faded into darkness, taking with them 30 years of other people's expectations. I was finally free to disappoint only myself. The plane touched down at Heathrow just as the sun was breaking through London's famous grey clouds. I collected my luggage with hands that barely trembled, walked through customs with a confidence I'd borrowed from some future version of myself, and stepped into a black cab that smelled like leather and possibility. My company apartment was in Kensington. A converted Victorian townhouse with tall windows and morning light that fell across hardwood floors like golden honey. The flat came furnished but sparse, a blank canvas waiting for someone to make it home. I set my suitcases down in the entryway and walked to the kitchen window. Below me, London stretched out in every direction, all red brick and green parks and winding streets that had existed for centuries before I was born and would continue long after I was gone. The weight of that history should have made me feel small. Instead, it made me feel infinite. That's when the tears came. Not the bitter tears I'd shed in my childhood bedroom, but something cleaner. I cried for the 17-year-old girl who'd dreamed of exactly this view, this moment, this freedom. I cried because she'd survived everything they'd done to convince her she was too small for big dreams. The kettle I found in the kitchen was electric and efficient, nothing like the ancient gas stove back home. I made tea with water that tasted different, leaves that came from a corner shop run by a Pakistani man who'd welcomed me with genuine warmth. Everything here was new, unfamiliar, mine to discover. My first day at Meridian Global arrived faster than I was ready for. The office occupied 3 floors of a glass building near Tower Bridge, all sleek lines and modern furniture and people who looked like they belonged in a magazine about successful professionals. "Catherine Harrison," I said to the receptionist, my American accent sounding impossibly loud in the hushed lobby. "I'm starting today in international marketing." She smiled with practiced British politeness. "Lovely. Let me ring up Marcus. He's expecting you." Marcus turned out to be my direct supervisor, a soft-spoken man in his 40s who treated new employees like guests he was genuinely excited to host. He walked me through the office, introducing me to colleagues whose names I immediately forgot, showing me conference rooms with views of the Thames. "You'll be working primarily with our European accounts," he explained as we settled in his office. "Your American perspective should be quite valuable for our clients expanding into U.S. markets." American perspective. He made it sound like an asset instead of a limitation. Like being different was exactly what they'd hired me for. The work was challenging in ways that made my brain stretch and grow. Account presentations, market analysis, client strategy sessions that lasted until evening. I found myself staying late not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time in years, I was solving problems that mattered, creating campaigns that reached real people, building something meaningful. My colleagues were cautiously friendly at first, the way Londoners often are with enthusiastic Americans. But gradually, over shared lunches and after-work drinks at pubs with names like the George and Dragon, they began treating me less like a curiosity and more like a person who belonged. "Where'd you work before this?" asked Priya, a senior account manager with a wicked sense of humor. "Chicago," I said, which was technically true. Marketing for a tech startup that didn't make it. Also technically true if you counted 8 months of unemployment as a failed startup and surviving family disappointment. 6 weeks into my London life, I bought a postcard from a tourist shop near Westminster. Big Ben at sunset, the classic view that appeared on everything from tea towels to refrigerator magnets. I spent 20 minutes in a coffee shop, staring at the blank space where a message should go. Finally, I stuck a cheerful yellow sticker in the corner that read, "Wish you were here," and left everything else empty. No signature, no return address, just Jessica's name and the Chicago address I'd memorized before I was old enough to spell it correctly. I mailed it from a red postbox that had probably been collecting letters since before my grandmother was born. The satisfying thunk of the postcard hitting the bottom felt like the period at the end of a very long sentence. November brought rain and shorter days and Robert's unexpected email. "Have some vacation time saved up. Mind if I visit?" He arrived on a Thursday looking somehow smaller in his winter coat, carrying a duffel bag and the careful expression of someone trying not to hope for too much. I met him at his hotel in Covent Garden, a modest place he'd chosen specifically because it wasn't presumptuous. "You look different," he said, studying my face as we stood awkwardly in the lobby. "Different how?" "Settled. Like you fit in your own skin now." We walked through London like tourists even though I'd been living there for months. Past the Houses of Parliament along the South Bank, through Borough Market where vendors sold cheeses and bread and stories about their families who'd been working these stalls for generations. "I'm proud of you," Robert said as we stood on Westminster Bridge, watching tour boats navigate the choppy Thames. "Not for the job, not for proving them wrong. For choosing yourself." His words hit me differently than I expected. Not like validation I'd been craving, but like recognition of something I'd already accepted about myself. "Thank you," I said and meant it. "For everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself." He kissed my cheek then, gentle and brief, and something clicked into place between us. Not romance. That ship had sailed when I'd chosen my family's version of my story over his faith in my potential. But friendship. Real friendship, built on mutual respect instead of shared damage. He flew back to Chicago on Sunday. I didn't ask when I'd see him again, and he didn't make promises about staying in touch. Some connections don't need constant maintenance to remain strong. That evening I walked home through Hyde Park as families were heading inside for dinner. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, was showing her father a drawing she'd made of the London skyline, complete with flying cars and rainbow bridges. "It's not realistic, sweetheart," her father said gently. "Bridges can't actually be made of rainbows." "But they could be," she insisted. "In the future they could be." I smiled as I passed them, remembering another little girl who'd drawn pictures of herself living in foreign cities, working important jobs, making a difference in the world. Someone had told that girl her dreams weren't realistic either. But here I was, walking through London at dusk, breathing air that tasted like freedom, living a life they'd insisted was impossible. Sometimes freedom doesn't announce itself with fanfare or victory parades. Sometimes it just settles into your bones like a deep breath you've been holding for decades. Sometimes it's as simple as walking home to an apartment that belongs to you in a city you chose, living a story you wrote yourself. I was finally home. If this story of ultimate revenge had you cheering Catherine on, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Robert placed that envelope in front of Jessica, knowing exactly what was inside. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.